Good morning, everyone. It was a wonderful speech, Dr. Feng. It's so hard to speak after you because I become speechless. I don't know what to add, given your comprehensive and insightful talk about the global economy, and you once again successfully turned something negative into positive, right? How the changing geopolitical environment actually provide a lot of opportunities to the world, especially emerging markets. Let me add a little bit to your talk because I'm the only one who still have time to do research on the stage. Because of your talk that I listened to in the last 18 months, I started to collect some data. For those of you who are still young, especially students on the second floor, there's something called input-output tables. And you can actually download the input-output tables for free from the Asian Development Bank and try to understand how this sort of indirect trade has been happening with the flying geese, catching up, moving up the value chains. So let me give you some key numbers based on my most recent research paper. So China's indirect export to the US has been rising from around 10% to 25% of overall Chinese value-added exports to the US. That's a huge number, and it happened in the last 5 or 6 years for obvious reasons. And second, the beneficiaries of this sort of rerouting of trade include Vietnam, obviously, Malaysia, Indonesia, Mexico, and surprisingly, South Korea and Canada. And the third fact is those economies have been moving up the value chains with more new technologies being spilled over from Chinese investment. As we all know, Chinese companies and CEOs have been going out, investing in those economies, establishing subsidiaries and plants with a goal to export to the major advanced economies market, as Dr. Feng has said. So, your business insight was verified by my academic research, which is secondary. But anyhow, let me move on to the panel discussion. Princess C, the MC, has already introduced the distinguished panelists. So sitting right next to me is Rakesh Mohan, who used to be the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank in India and also the Executive Director of the IMF. Currently, he's a distinguished fellow of a very important think tank in India called Center for Social and Economic Progress. So we're going to talk about both progresses in India and also in the rest of the world. Sitting right next to him is Nolene Hazer. Those of you who came to the pre-conference dinner probably still remember what she said last night about her recent work trying to mediate interstate and intrastate conflicts, especially in Myanmar. Former Undersecretary General of the United Nations and also Executive Director of UNESCO. So let me jump into the panel discussion. I try to find solutions for the world rather than just trying to describe the world. Let me start with Nolene. The very high-level general question. Tell us something about the primary challenges facing.
Again?
Yeah.
Could you repeat that?
Yes. Tell us something about the primary challenges facing emerging markets today. We know after several years of COVID, given the geopolitical tension, emerging markets have been accumulating more debt. Probably there have been rising inequality in some of the economies and countries that you have been working on. And also tell us a little bit about sort of social economic situations in emerging markets.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That was a really complex question. But I must say that I was so inspired, Dr. Feng. But, what you just did provided us with a fantastic frame and also ended on such a positive and hopeful note, even if it's going to be a struggle. Well, we are, unfortunately, living in a very complex and turbulent times. And we are faced with interlocking multiple disruptions. And I could see 4 of them interacting. So one, many of us, or all of us, have had to struggle with the health pandemic, with COVID-19. And the impact of that on lives and livelihoods have been very deep. But it also taught us several lessons, and that's not going to be the last pandemic. So there are many lessons that we need to learn from that. Then the other, there's one more point to make there. If we learned anything, it is to pay attention to our weakest link, because the weakest link could be the one that breaks the whole link, the whole chain. The second challenge that interacts with that is climate change. And this is an existential threat. And I know that there are some people who disbelieve that it is happening, but all the scientific evidence points to that. And it also tells us what we need to do, the net zero treatment and passageway. And how do we do that is a big challenge, but this can also be an opportunity. In the same, so I think that one of the big challenge now is how do we turn every single challenge and threat into opportunities? I mean, look at what it has opened up in the market. The EVs, the solar panels, the business that has created, and eventually became a threat for China, right? But again, we can see how to actually deal with the issue of sustainability as a new business model. I think the third threat is also an opportunity, is what Victor talked about, is really the technology, our cyber world, and how we manage that. Currently, it provides tremendous opportunity, but it's also a threat if we can't function properly within that. Because what it does is that it requires a skilled population, a more educated new generation. And what happens in that world is actually one that transforms employment in a sense that it's not anymore a case of learning a skill and applying it for life. There's no such thing as lifelong employment. Many of our youth will be having to have multiple employments and having to change employment and learning these skills. And therefore, it's no longer, our education is no longer learning what to learn, but how to learn and how to read the environment in which we are functioning in and how to navigate that. But also, there are threats in that. I mean, we know all the echo chambers that have been developed, all the divisions that have been created, and also the violence that have been with all the fake news and the fake porn and all that stuff. So how on earth do you actually protect people in that space and the threats that come from that? And the fourth one is a very painful one. And that is, how on earth do we manage our conflicts in such a way that it doesn't turn into wars? And we can see the major wars that we have. Today, in today's world, there are 55 active conflicts, and some major ones that we do not know how to solve. And that has created migration, forced displacement, people who can no longer live in their own space. And you have all these tensions, and it has created threats and insecurities in the developed countries, as we have seen. And so I don't need to go into that. And if we take all that, then what do we do? I think we have to actually regain our confidence that we know how to manage, because we're at that inflection point of really facing a breakdown or a breakthrough. And how do we move? What would a breakthrough mean? It means actually to regain our humanity and what humanity can only do. And this is to have creativity and long-term vision. Creativity, long-term vision, and Asia is really outstanding in that. Many of our generations have brought us here today because they had that long-term vision and they knew how to make sacrifices along the way for the future, and how to navigate that. But it also needs agency. I think we cannot lose our sense of agency and the power of transformation. Only human beings, our humanity and our dignity can allow us to transform a negative, horrible situation, to regain, to build up resilience, and to move on. And I think that these are all things that can be incorporated. But I just want to end by what Victor said, and this is so important. You know, the other thing about our world today is that it's no longer state-driven. It's no longer state-centric. We are at a situation where power is diffused, where decision-making is diffused, where influence is diffused. And in such a situation, the business sector can play a major role through all kinds of multi-stakeholder alliances building, right? But at the same time, I think what Victor says is so critical. You can actually, because I work in the multilateral system, and all of you know that the multilateral system is weakening. The rule-based world order is weakening, and it could even be on life support at this particular moment. Where are the new norms and standards coming in? What does it really look like on the ground? So the norms and standards, your standard setting, especially when your value chain go into all these emerging markets, and people need jobs, they need opportunities, but it has to be done in such a way that you differentiate good business from bad business. And we can no longer work as Factory Asia. But we have to be able to move up this value chain and set new norms and standards of doing business. And I think that is so critical. And when you do that, you bring in the issue of inclusiveness, you bring in the issue of sustainability, and you build up resilience. You value the human capital, and you build on that. And in fact, Asia has done that tremendously. Out of poverty, we created middle-class societies. And then we invested. And then we moved up the value chain in terms of knowledge economy. And increasingly, I think that this is the opportunity. And of course, I just would like to say that this geopolitical tension is not just about trade war. And I think what has also happened is the fact that it is also linked to national security. And so if you think of the three T's. So in Asia, of course, it is about trade, it's about technology, but we also have to make sure that the Taiwan issue doesn't blow up and is managed well. I say that only because we in Asia have got to learn how to deal with differences, to find common grounds, to actually not feed the root of conflicts. We have to ensure that we focus on the root of cooperation, and we have to show that we are able to do it, largely because we are investing not just in terms of our national context, but also our regional context, and to build in more regional connectivity on that. I should stop there now, but I just wanted to share that.
I mean, Nolene just gave another keynote speech. This is an amazing set of ideas. In particular, I like your final remark that Asian countries have been building resilience through economic exchanges, and we love peace. And maintaining peace in this region is going to be an important stabilizer for the changing geopolitical landscape. So I'm going to come back to you and ask for some specific solutions based on your experiences working in the UN for so many years. So I'm going to turn to Rakesh. If Victor, you don't mind, you can rest a little bit before answering the toughest question I'm going to give you. Rakesh, so coming from India, which is not a small but a huge emerging market. tell us a little bit about, what is the most recent economic developments in India, and what are some of the challenges and opportunities that you see for India, given the U.S.-China tension and the changing global economic landscape.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hawaii. Now, what do you expect me to say after 2 keynote speeches?
Give a third one. Give a third keynote speech now.
But first, a couple of preliminary remarks, which is, I'm really deeply honored and delighted to be included in the Asia Global Dialogue this year. Thank you, Victor, and thank you, Hawaii. Especially because, as you know, I think my only remaining mission in life now is to get India closer to the rest of Asia, to the east of us. Because of colonial origins, with apologies to Mike, we're looking too much to the west all the time. And I think it's time, given everything that Victor has said, that we have to look towards the east, and that's, I think, my remaining mission in life. Now, a problem I have is Dr. Feng gave such a comprehensive keynote. I have a suspicion he must have taken my notes because I have not much left to say. And the other thing I would note is, there are 2 kinds of people in the world. One set of people put problems in front of solutions. Other kind of people put solutions in front of problems. And he clearly belongs to the latter. This is really a difficult job for me, but you've made it slightly easier for me to talk about India. So I'm actually, after all these very high-level keynotes from Noreen and Victor, I come from the trenches. I've always worked in the trenches. So first, let me just say that in terms of what's been happening in the last few years, especially, of course, after Trump's election, I would quote, I think, was it Mao who said, was asked about the impact of the French Revolution, and he said, it's too early to tell. So I think it was Mao, was it Zhou Enlai? I forget who said that. It was Zhou Enlai, right? It's too early to tell, so I think it's still too early to tell what's going to happen. Okay, so as far as India is concerned, I think that we are perhaps among the less affected of what's going on in the world. And I think that one of the consequences, I'm not sure if there's a connection, something that I welcome is the recent last couple of weeks movement in terms of hopefully more positive relations between India and China. And that may be because of what has happened, in that just in line with what Victor said in terms of manufacturing and other activities moving out from China, that there are signs that India is saying that, look, we would like more FDI from China. And I hope that what you said will reach our policymakers much more, because I think that's really a key issue for us. Now, what has happened in India recently, first of all, let me just say that I subscribe to what you said, that it's after almost 200, 250 years that, in a sense, the fulcrum or center of gravity of the global economy is in the process of moving. The way I put it is from the mid-Atlantic to somewhere in the Indo-Pacific. And we need to be part very much of that movement on the Indo side, so to speak. So what's been happening in India, of course, is that we must do much more to be part of this movement. We have, as you know, been growing pretty well in the last number of years. Since the 1990s, we've grown at something like 6.5% to 7% annual growth real for now 30, 35 years. Now, the difference is that, when you say a 6, 7.5, 7 compared with 10 for China from 1980 to 2010, it doesn't seem very much. But over 30 years, there's a huge difference between 7% and 10, because it's at 10, you double every 7 years, with 7, you double every 10 years. So it makes a huge difference. According to current expectations, we will grow at around 6-7% for the next few years, including the IMF's expectation. The emerging markets are expecting a little over 4% on average, and advanced economies around 2% on average for the next 5 years or so. So in that sense, we are sort of really at the upper end. But of course, from a lower level. Because we have to keep reminding ourselves in India that within the G20 itself, in terms of per capita income, we are the lowest in the G20, despite all the strengths that we do have. The inflation, let me also say that one of the very interesting things that happened COVID and after COVID is that actually emerging markets in general, and certainly India in particular, we did a much better job in macro management than the developed countries. In that our inflation has been roughly under control. It went up to around 6.5%, but that is relative to our average about 5%. So we didn't go up very much. So there was the difference between the target of inflation and what actually happened was much lower. And that's partly because and this is true for most emerging markets, that our macro management in some sense has been much more skillful. And we didn't have the kind of fiscal and monetary excesses that the advanced economies had in Europe, UK, US, etc. So that, I think, is a big achievement on our part. And I think that we will continue in this fashion, 6-7% growth in the next few years. Inflation around 5%, I think not 4%, which is our target, unless there's a major resurgence in oil prices. And that, by the way, has been also controlled by India essentially processing Russian oil and then supplying it to the West. And despite what they say, I think the advanced economies, the West has been very happy that we are doing that processing and then exporting to them in terms of essentially keeping up the supply of global oil so that their prices don't go up. Well, one major problem for us is our industrial growth has been tepid. It needs to be much more, and especially, Victor, in the areas that you mentioned. And once again, you said everything I would have said, which is that we really need to concentrate on labor-intensive manufactured exports, which despite our low wages, we have not done so far. And I hope that we will listen to you and get more Chinese medium enterprises coming to India. And whatever I can do in that respect, although since I'm no longer in the government, there's not much I can do. Although I'm still a member of the Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister. So that I hope will happen. Let me just give a couple more comments, unless you want me to continue. Okay. Just stop me when you want to stop me.
I think
because I can continue for another 45 minutes.
no. It's by the way, the secret is Victor was supposed to be the moderator, so I stepped in, but now he all of a sudden realized that he should be one again. So he actually gave me 2 signals that he wants to have a exchange and a conversation with you on some of the points that you already made.
Let me just say a couple more points, which is that among our problems, and this is not in the area of Victor being solutions, okay, so is that we have relatively low labor force participation rates. And that itself, again, the opportunity is that we have a lot of labor to employ. So that's the opportunity, right? And especially of women, although they've been rising in recent years, last 5 years. Within that, I must also mention that we now churn out about 10 million graduates a year. 10 million. I think China is about 15 million, if I'm not mistaken. And there's a lot of people. But again, there's a problem, which is difficulty finding employment. Our export growth is slow. Therefore, again, an opportunity is the kind that you were mentioning. FDI has also been low. And we had a golden growth in the 2000s when it went up to about 7 to 8%, near 8% a year. Of course, and it went down after that. Of course, when this is mentioned, I said there's only one variable. I stepped down from the Reserve Bank of India in 2009, so everything went low after that. So Um, so, so I think that's one of the issues. Maybe I should go back to be a deputy governor. Um, and one of the things that has happened in the last 10 years, actually different from the previous 50, is that from around 1950 to 2010, our savings rates and investment rates were going up almost continuously, obviously some ups and downs. So our savings rate was around 37% in 2008-9, just before the North Atlantic financial crisis, and it's now around 30%. So same thing with investment. I've just mentioned passing before I pass on to you, unless you want me to talk more in India, but I'll restrain myself. That this is a real problem of savings and investment, our current private investment is a bit tepid again. So that's sort of, and again, that points to exports in the sense that why are companies not investing further? Okay, because they're not seeing enough new demand, and therefore looking at, as you mentioned actually, looking at the whole world as your market, you can see much more demand out there. And one thing I would finally say is that what you mentioned about Asia, that one is you talk about the absolute level of demand from the US and Europe continuing 40%, but if you look at incremental demand, it's coming much more from Asia. Next 5 years as well, but certainly the next 20 years.
Shifting.
And shifting, actually. And the way I put it is, look, there are about 4 billion people in Asia, South Asia plus China plus ASEAN, right? If 4 billion people buy one shirt extra a year, one pair of shoes extra a year, one table extra a year, and so on, everything that you buy in Walmart, this market is going to be much more than the Western market in the heyday of 20 years when China went up. I'll stop there, otherwise he'll sort of cut me off.
No, Victor has been waiting. And you want to say something about getting Chinese companies to India?
Well, maybe not that specific. William Fong is the expert on that one. Rakesh, I really thank you for your comments. I'm a student of India. I'm really intrigued by India. And I'd like to take this opportunity for you and I on the stage to really just have a quick couple of questions. First thing I'd like to say is that, I talked about, really the medium-sized enterprises from China going abroad. But the world definitely will not be restricted to just medium-sized companies coming from China. I think the next big wave, Nolene, is going to come from ASEAN. And they will globalize. But the big one, in my mind, is actually India. I think if the world belongs to medium-sized enterprises, the ultimate pool of medium-sized entrepreneurial businesses is Indian. And in fact, if you look at Africa and so on, they're already there. So I think that force is something that I want to think about. But I like to sort of raise a little more controversial issue, which is the impact of the use of technology on the economic development. The thing I like to bring up in the context of India is, India has pursued, the normal path, really working on infrastructure and so on. But in my mind, India has leapfrogged in the technology area. I'm talking now about the Indian stack. And my friends in India who are in technology have told me that, the introduction of technology in India has just been staggering. Every Indian, as you know, Rakesh, now has an identity, a QR code, biometric, etc. So you can actually transfer money from one individual to another individual without going through any of the intermediaries. And now from my friends in India tell me that now you're digitalizing the small and medium-sized enterprises within India. So which means that you'll be able to build a digital backbone that actually could lead to another path of economic development and in a sense intercede that. And when that backbone links with the global digital network, I think you're going to see a leapfrog from the Indian industries. What do you think about that?
Victor, let me first say that as so my first degree was in electrical engineering, so I object to IT being called technology because technology is much bigger. But that's just by the way. Also, first in terms of the opportunities for India in the way that you have mentioned, one thing that strikes me is that I looked at some data, also a little bit of research like that the total trade surplus with the US of Korea plus Taiwan plus Vietnam is 200 billion now. And China is about 280. So that's telling me what you're saying, that for India, this is now a huge, huge, huge opportunity for us. Now, coming to the IT, yes, what we have done in terms of digitizing or digitalizing, I never know what's the difference between digitizing and digitalizing, but whichever it is, we have the progress in that in the banking system, in the financial transactions, etc., is amazing. And I always, like I said, learn from the trenches. To give you an example of how efficient it is, my chauffeur, his daughter had to be hospitalized for some surgery. He has medical insurance, so it was not a problem, even though it was an expensive private hospital. But he rang me up while standing in the line to go to the desk. And he said that, look, yes, I'm covered by insurance, but they're asking for 40,000 rupees as a deposit, which I'll get back from the insurance. But I don't have that money. So can you believe that from the time that he went up in the line to the desk, I was able to transfer that money digitally to him? That's giving you just an example of how efficient things have become. Second, again, what you said about digitizing of small and medium enterprises. So just 2 weeks ago, against my better judgment, I joined the board of a fintech company, only because I'm curious about how this thing actually works. What are they going to do? They are going to put together, right, for a whole range of enterprises with their permission, their identity, their bank accounts, their other liabilities, etc., so that on their platform, a potential lender to these small and medium enterprises, with their permission, if they give permission, that look, you do it, that they will have all that available. All right. So for the lender, they just have to go to that platform to get information on what kind of lending to do for small and medium enterprises. So this, I think, if there's one company, presumably others are doing it, but they're unique in the sense they're going to have this platform on the basis of the unique identity, because that's for individuals. So this also, what sort of credit information agencies do, this will be much bigger, but using exactly the India stack, actually. Yeah. So this is going to revolutionize things.
Exactly. And really, the question that keeps coming back to my mind is, will the use of technology, like the example of the Indian stack in India, allow developing economies now to leapfrog? Yeah. And I think that really is the key issue.
So this is a question I would raise to everyone, actually, and the people raising this question of the hit on employment because of AI, etc. And my question here is, look, this has been happening forever. That is, in the early 19th century, was about 60% or 70% of US labor was in agriculture, something of that order. Early 19th century, something like that. It's 2% now. Okay, right? So if that can be done without major disruption, I mean, why do we think that new technology will have some different effect?
Well, Rakesh, that question you have to ask Professor Mike Spence. He is an expert on the disruption of unemployment, and the labor with the technology. I myself think actually more jobs will be created with the technology. Yeah. I'm very confident of that. But the world has a massive problem on retraining.
Yeah, absolutely.
You got to get the workforce from here to there. Yeah. And you talk about billions of people.
Yes. So I learned things from odd things. That a recent novel by, of all people, Ken Follett. I was saying this to Mike in the car this morning. Okay, He has this imaginary town in west of England, on which he has written 3 or 4 novels starting from the 11th and 12th century. His latest one is at the turn of the 19th century, beginning of the 19th century, when industrial revolution was just beginning. And he talks about this town in west of England where most of the economic activity was in weaving, textile weaving and textile spinning by hand, actually. And it was then moving to Lancashire. Okay. And he recounts, typically in a novelist's way, and I understood much better than reading economics history, right, on the incredibly serious impact on people in that town losing jobs. They were trying to unionize. The British Parliament at that time, maybe even now, was so repressive that they actually used to execute people, execute for organizing, okay? So what I'm saying is that this kind of pain has gone through in many different times. And as Noreen said, we now have to think about going through these changes without that kind of pain. And that is the challenge. That look, there are going to be challenges, some people are going to lose. How do we cater to that? And particularly in Asia, because it's our century, Victor, it's our century.
I also have to say I'm an economist. Side payments don't do it. You need much, much more than side payments.
You know, I was going to ask a tough question to Victor, but you know, he had taken so much time to be the de facto moderator for just now. So I couldn't ask him this question, and instead I direct that question to Nolene and Rakesh, which is, I mean, that question is going to come up from the audience if I don't ask it, which is the new Trump administration, right? The shift in trade and economic policies. I know it is still too early to tell, like what Rakesh has said, but what would be the potential implications, you know, if there would be increase in tariffs imposed by the U.S. on China, and you know, some withdrawal by the U.S. government from some of the global discussions and agreements about climate change issues, etc. So maybe, Nolene, you can say something either about trade or about climate change with the new U.S. government.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that. You know, even if I look at what is happening now, I mean, we are never for certain because, I mean, Trump is basically a very transactional person. He's not an ideological person. But let me just talk about him withdrawing, very likely he will, from the Paris Agreement. And this is a major climate change issue. I think there are two things to look at when we think of that particular issue. One is really, how do we make sure that there is agreement on what is seen as evidence? Because there is such a contestation of whose alternate reality. I think that was a term that he used in his first part, right? And for the first time, that issue of contestation about facts came in. So I think that is one area of what do we see as knowledge, whose knowledge, and how do we make use of that and react towards that. But the other thing is that even when, during his first term, when he pulled out of many of the multilateral agreements and so on, that did not stop the US from actually participating. And mainly because there is, as I mentioned earlier, a diffusion in power and in decision-making and in influence. And what happened was that you can take national policy decisions, but at the end of the day, powerful cities can make their own decisions. And that was exactly what happened. The mayors of so many cities took their own decision. And at the end of the day, I think the climate crisis, and whether we win or we lose, that battle will be fought, either we win or lose, in our cities. Because that's where the major consumption of energy actually happens. And from all predictions that we have now, by the year 2050, 70% of the world's population will be living in cities. And that whole migration from rural to urban will actually take place, right? And already there is a fantastic network that started as a C40 network, and these were the top leaders of fantastic, mayors and so on. But now it has reached 100 cities around the world, very powerful cities that are tracking what they do independent of national positions. And I think that increasingly the ground up initiative, where people take initiatives, and what happens at the ground has a major consequences in terms of what happens in reality. And on the ground, it's not just the work of the mayors. I think they are able to mobilize citizens. So the citizens' agency becomes extremely important as well. So from businesses to citizens to community organizing and so on. And I think that all that is very positive and can be done. Let me come to the trade issue. Obviously, the tariffs will have a major impact, and I think Victor has already gone through that. But picking up on the fact that it is an opportunity for medium and small-scale industry, especially in the age of digitization. And I think that this has opened up a whole new venue even for women enterprises and women in the garment factories and so on, right? And so there are tremendous opportunities that can be done with basically the redistribution of the value chain that Victor has already spoken about. And this is precisely it. I think what we have to do is to try to improve the working conditions in these areas in such a way that we can close some of the development gaps that we see. And that's absolutely critical. I mean, we talked about, if we are not careful, what we do not want to actually do is to entrench the inequality fractures that we see in our society. And how can we use this new wave to actually address some of the inequalities, because those fractures can be absolutely dangerous. And how do we do that? We have to invest in our social protection, we have to address in our healthcare, address in having a much longer health span, so because of many of our countries are aging, they're aging, and all this can be done not from the position of cost, but but from the position of investment. And I say that because by increasing building up the income security of so many people actually adds to the consumer market. And it also creates your aggregate demand. And therefore, it will improve people's participation in the market. And that is absolutely critical, because at the end of the day, if we are to improve the economic well-being and economic security of people, it is through jobs, and it is through better incomes for our people, and also the possibility of making sure that they have both the economic investments, but also the social investment that allows them to function to their full potential.
Hey, wait, I'm going to ask your permission to allow me to co-host the session.
I was going to say something, Victor.
Because
you go first.
What Noreen has said, especially at the beginning of these remarks, is incredibly inspiring. And let me just try to bring that out. And what's on the marquee, unwritten, is what's happening to the multilateral system, and what can we do about it. And what you really said is, stop trying to fix it at the top with the tops down. That is a lost cause. You've got to now, with the diffusion of power and also with the availability of technology, new media and so on, it has to be rebuilt from the ground up. Now, you can argue, is it on a regional basis or from a, or even at a province or state basis or city basis or people basis? You can argue about that. But the direction is from bottom up and not from the top down. I think that to me is an incredible insight into really the future of the multilateral system. So I think I just wanted to just share that thought. Sorry.
I completely agree with you, Victor. And I want to say or add a few things to what Nolene just said. There's a big body of research showing how globalization, in particular trade, has created a lot of inequality within countries, especially in rich countries. And now we are in a process of re-globalization. And by the way, I don't like the word deglobalization because I don't think it is happening. Globalization is just changing, and it has become more diverse and more sort of rebalanced, in terms of having more and smaller economies participating in globalization. So we have a second chance to leverage on globalization to achieve what you just mentioned, right? How to have inclusive globalization, how to make sure that not only the multinational firms or the rich people getting most from this new wave of globalization. That's what I want to add a little bit. And I think there have been recent studies looking at Vietnam and Mexico, and they have been seeing actually reduction in inequality as a result of new jobs being created due to these China plus N strategies adopted by companies. Victor, I think we should at some point open up the Q&A to the floor. This is something that we are very proud of, right? So you have gone to many conferences in the last few days. This is the only chance that the participants are actually from the floor, not only from the stage. But Rakesh, so before I turn to the audience, you want to say something?
Just very quickly, 3 points. One, supporting what Noreen just said on the impact of the new president and on climate change, etc. Again, the faith in the US more decentralized system, so the government is not as powerful. It may be externally, but not internally. I'll give you again, always have examples from the trench. So I was heading another research institute, economic research institution in the late 1990s, the National Council of Applied Economic Research. 1998, when India blew the nuclear bomb, right, we had sanctions from everyone, okay? So just give an example on this. So at this small, with this research institute, we had a grant from the USAID to do something innocuous like, computable general equilibrium model. Can you believe as part of sanctions, they stopped that grant in the middle because of a bomb? So I went to the Ford Foundation headquarters in New York. They said, we'll fund it, So I'm giving that example that when the US government does something, there is civil society, cities, etc. So we shouldn't lose hope on the climate change. Second, on the trade issue, that we don't, the Trump of course has announced he'll put 20% tariff on all goods and 60% on Chinese. God knows what will actually happen. But one consequence that people have forgotten is that if he puts tariffs across the board, basically the US exchange rate has to appreciate. Okay? So that will actually make the US even less competitive, and the trade deficit may go up and not down. And there will be this kind of trade diversion that you've talked about. So I think that is something that we need to, and again within that context, to the extent that the Asian intra-regional trade is increasing, right? That'll increase even faster because of this. Finally, the third point on multilateral governance, that's exactly what is happening, this regionalization. That is, take the IMF, and I know that more of that since I was there, that the current distribution of quotas and votes reflects the global GDP distribution 2008. That is 16 years out of date, in which the distribution has completely changed. And even though the IMF articles of agreement say that you have to change it every 5 years, depending on the changes in distribution, in fact, ever since the emerging markets, particularly China's waste started going up in the early 2000s, the West has been resisting the changing the governance. Because of this, to some extent, exactly what Victor is saying, emerging markets saying, look, if you won't let us play with your toy, we'll create our own toys, okay? Whether it's Chiang Mai, whether it's AIIB, etc., and also lots of RCEP and so on. Again, if the US won't join CTPPP, we'll do it ourselves. That's exactly what is happening. The multilateral system being regionalized and growing from the ground up.
Victor, may I have your permission to open up the Q&A to the audience? All right, let's take a few questions. We're around 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A. Brian Wong, you're always the first one. I didn't allow you to ask the first question last year. I would let you do it this time. All right, Brian.
Thank you very much. This was a wonderful discussion. I teach philosophy. That's all I do. And my question concerns the other side to industrial policies, or rather the other side to the equation beyond tariffs, which is the question of industrial policy and subsidies, right? And that's the other side of the coin. We've seen over the past decade or so allegations that China had used subsidies in regards to advanced manufacturing sectors like electric vehicles, which notably China has stopped doing actually a few years back. So it's no longer subsidizing a lot of these firms, despite the allegations that persist. America is also engaging in subsidies. They call it industrial policy. The European Union call it capacity building, which is best of luck to them. So given all of that, then my question to you is, what role do subsidies by the government play in a country's developmental strategy? And to what extent can governments subsidize more effectively or less effectively? And what are the determinants of efficacy, so to speak, in these cases? Thank you very much.
All right. Who wants to? So I don't want to go around the floor too much. So why don't we answer this question first? Rakesh?
Yeah, so I have a somewhat different view that most governments won't agree with me. My view is that if a particular country, whether it's China, US, whoever, is subsidizing, we should be very happy, because if we import that stuff, we are getting the subsidy rather than trying to retaliate. But as I say, most governments don't agree with me on that. If it is the case that the US subsidizes chip production, right, it'll become cheaper. So I should buy those chips. Why do I want to waste my subsidies on the same thing? And especially if I'm less advanced technologically. Again, and on China, here's a question to everyone, which I hope later on someone can. Most importing nations, including our industries, say we can't compete because China subsidizes everything. I've been very puzzled by this. When I look at the Chinese budget, their fisc is pretty balanced. So I don't see. Of course, they said no, but they're all hidden. So if someone can send me a paper later on telling me how they subsidize, the one thing I do understand is that they subsidize land incredibly for industry. And that, for us, is a problem because we don't as much, and our land is expensive. But that issue of subsidy, I think, is very important to understand how our country is subsidizing and to what extent. I understand that China has, 100 EV makers, is that correct?
EV companies.
EV companies, yes. Yeah. They couldn't be subsidizing 100 companies. Maybe they are, I don't know.
I don't think they're doing it now, but in the past maybe. But Victor?
Just very quickly, I understand your point. Okay? I don't completely agree with it, but I think it's a fundamental trade-off, Brian, between the consumer and the business. Is really this is the real issue here. The business obviously is thinking about what they would regard as fair or unfair competition. But then your point, right, which very well made, is if other people are willing to subsidize my consumers, thank you very much. So really, I think that is the real issue. And I think what you really need to do is go back to competition globally. This is a very complex non-zero-sum game. Do you want to play it in a aggressive zero-sum basis, or you do it cooperatively? If you do it cooperatively, you're not talking about manufacturing in one country and shipping to another, or you're talking about distributing the manufacturing process so everybody gets a bit of the chain. You see the point? It really has to do with whether you play this very complex non-zero-sum game in a competitive zero-sum manner or not. And so this is up here.
Victor, one point, not just consumers. If they're subsidizing inputs, because chips are all inputs, okay? They're subsidizing my industry as an input. Or steel, they're subsidizing my industry as an input. It's not just consumers, they're subsidizing all our industries.
Yeah. See, that's a distributed manufacturing model.
No, I mean, industrial policy is a deep topic, and we know it is back, especially in advanced economies. But I think Brian's question is a rational question. You are still asking a question about whether subsidies or industrial policies can promote growth. But most of the industrial policies we see around the world today are not really pro-growth, right? They are for national security, supply chain resilience, many other things. But anyhow, I want to maximize the number of questions from the floor. Professor Zhi Wang, and then there's a hand at the back later. Wait for the microphone, please.
I have two questions for Victor. So I'm fully agree with you. The geopolitical tensions and the U.S. new administration, new tariffs imposed will cause another wave of industrialization in emerging markets or global south. My question is, you say you make a comparison between the 1980s in South China. So that time, for the Chinese industrialization, the supplier of capital, technology, and the management know-how is from Taiwan, from Hong Kong, from Japan, from Korea, and also later from the Western countries. So who will be the major supplier of the capital, technology, and the management know-how to the new wave of industrialization in the global south? And what is the implication when the majority of global south become industrialized? What is that implication for China? That's the first question.
Professor Zhi Wang, please, only one question, because we are
no, I have a second question about the multinationals.
Okay.
So
can we,
Victor Fang is emphasis on the medium-sized companies. That's true. If you see the 80s in China, there's a lot of mid-sized and small companies in Hong Kong and Taiwan come to mainland China to facilitate the industrialization. But the multinationals also play a very important role. So how the multinational strategy, China plus one, in the third countries, is possible to create a win-win situation for cooperation of Chinese multinationals, like Meidi, like Ningde, like the Dajiang, like the other many Chinese multinationals with the Western multinationals, corporations in third countries? That's the second question. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wang. Victor?
I'll try and handle that, Professor. Look, at one point in China's growth path over the 20 years since 25 years since economic opening, half of the exports of China was accounted for by multinationals, right? And it was very clear where the technology came from. And part of the model is actually a way of transferring know-how and transferring technology. Today, because of the geopolitical environment, I think the free flow of technology, in my mind, will be more and more restricted. In fact, I hope it doesn't get choked off completely. People talk about small yard, high fence. You guys all familiar with this? You read about this in the FT every day. Small yard, high fence. There's a small group of technology they want to protect with a high fence. I think there's going to be bifurcation, of the technology, and really a very zero sum going on in the technology. But my point, though, is the proportion of dual use technology is getting more and more. And I'm hoping that it doesn't choke off the technology to the non-small yard products, if I can use that term. You know, that everyday use products that benefits the people doesn't get cut off from the technology sources because of what's happening in these, the dispute, if you would, over the small yard, sensitive high tech. So I've been a very strong advocate of, can we not just think about advancing the frontiers of knowledge on the technology? How about taking things that are not even at the frontier, you know, AI and so on, but, you know, more established technology, and start thinking about applying that to existing and older industries to remake them. I frankly think that is one of the best business opportunities in the world, is really the remaking of old industries using technology. And the other is, I think it does a lot more, I think, for the people. And the more you do that, the more then you're able to share the technology, which was actually quite readily shared before, and get out of the spiral that we're now seeing at the small yard, you know, products and the high end of the technology. So those are I'm sorry I combined your two questions into one.
So, if I could just to turn that question to you, actually, that as I understand it, is it 50% or a very large proportion of total trade is within multinationals in the world?
Yes.
Right? So, in reference to this question, that presumably that technology transfer within multinationals will keep happening.
Is a question
to you?
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, this is an interesting panel. Everyone is a moderator. Yes, over half of trade is, you know, being manipulated, well, not managed by multinational firms. And in fact, over 1/3 of trade is intermediate inputs, including technology and capital. You know, wearing my academic hat again, you know, there's a recent paper by George Lerner from the Harvard Business School showing that there has been an increased technology spillover from Chinese innovation to emerging market companies. So, you know, to answer Professor Wang's question, it is happening. At least in terms of technology, China has played the traditional roles of Japan, Korea, the US in helping middle-income countries, emerging markets, to get some of the technologies that they need to upgrade their industries. I mean, all this research is based on patent citation, patent similarities, etc. Yep. All right, so before Nolene became the fourth moderator, let me take one question at the back who has been waiting. Yes, over there. No, okay, so that gentleman who has been waiting, and then, you know, back to you again. So please raise your hand. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Very generous to offer me the mic. I appreciate the very insightful comments from everybody on the panel. I think it's very refreshing to see such different and slightly more positive spin on recent events. I would like to ask about, you know, this question of capital, right? You guys have, the panel has talked a lot about sort of the real flows. Oh, sorry. My name is Galvin. I'm an economist with Trade Development Council in Hong Kong, but also an analyst with the Fung Global Institute around 10 years ago. So my question was about sort of, you mentioned a lot about shifting patterns of real, you know, goods and services flows that might arise from this new geopolitical paradigm. My question is about capital flows, right? What's, you know, the IMF, recent experience, you know, Bank of Japan talks a little bit about raising interest rates by about like 10 basis points, and capital markets really go a little bit haywire. We're definitely out of the this old paradigm of the great moderation, right? Inflation is probably going to be a bit higher, barriers to trade and capital a little bit higher, geopolitical tensions definitely higher. So what's the impact of this new paradigm on capital flows, on financial capital flows, and how might that impact the development of emerging economies, right? Does that mean that we're going to be seeing more financial crises? Will that mean capital is more likely to go to places like, as Dr. Feng was mentioning, Europe or the US? Does it mean it's going to be harder to secure financial capital flows into the emerging markets? I would love to hear your insights on any of those questions.
Rakesh, the former executive director of IMF.
So actually, that's a very good question. And one thing that we've not mentioned is the U.S. president-elect's plans on further tax cutting along with the tariffs, okay? Now, if the net result is of the U.S. Budget deficit going up even further, right? And the US debt GDP ratio going up even further, then there's bound to be increase in the sovereign interest rates on US treasuries. And that will raise overall interest rates in the world. And of course, US interest rates. The implication of that would be there'll be more capital flowing back to the US. So I think that's a very important possible consequence for which we need to be prepared for. But again, taking the role of the moderator, I'll ask Victor that on this question, that does this mean that there will be more capital flows from China as a consequence to other countries?
I think this is a very, very good question. Again, we can talk about sort of tops-down capital flows, but I'd like to give a bottoms-up view. One of the main pain points as medium-sized companies, let's say from China, go overseas and set up plants in Indonesia, India, or Mexico, or whatever. One of the biggest pain points is availability of capital. And I think that is something that Hong Kong is actually very much looking at, and actually taking care of that pain point by developing our international finance center, much more along these lines, and to integrate with this flow, okay, and really become one of the major things that Hong Kong can do. The reason is very simple. As we all know, China basically is controlled exchange, and there's SAFE, which actually controls the outflow of capital. I think SAFE is very, very supportive of this flow, but there's only so much they could allow to go out, in a sense, on an official basis. Now, so these companies, although they may have the desire and the ability to go, they don't have the money. So one of the first things one could start with is actually providing them with trade finance. Because if even a relatively small factory by medium-sized enterprise gets set up in a developing economy, it sells stuff to Walmart, I'm more than happy to buy that Walmart receivable. So that's the easiest way to do the initial financing. And then you get into making loans, and then you get into actually participating in equity. So the question that you raise is, who is going to finance this flow? And I think, one way is it's going to be very difficult. I don't think it's going to be really Chinese state capital because of the capital controls and SAFE and so on. I do think that Hong Kong could play a very big role. And in this regard, there's a lot of talk about the availability of offshore renminbi. And Hong Kong could be a gathering place for offshore renminbi to be recycled into this movement of factories. And then with that capital, we can think about trade finance, we can think about loans, we can think about equity. And then, of course, the fund managers hopefully will play a very key role because there'll be huge opportunities. Rakesh, you and I will remember in the 70s, the offshore dollar, the euro dollars, and how London has become a real center for euro dollars. And I'm seeing that sort of phenomenon. So I think the flows, will be, really to answer that question is, I think people have to think about how do you actually finance this? And this is not just China going to Southeast Asia. I think the medium-sized enterprises around the world will be globalizing this production into many developing economies. So how are we going to finance that? Again, it's the bottoms-up view. And I think it's an opportunity.
This could also mean that as the center of gravity of global trade has been moving from the west, from the Atlantic to the Indo-Pacific, this could also mean the movement of financial capital, center of gravity, slowly from the Atlantic to here. I mean, it'll take longer, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. So obviously, what is happening in terms of the tax break and the deregulation as well in the U.S., and also because of the tariffs in many of our countries from 10%, 20%, 60%, all that will obviously be an attraction to have capital flowing to the U.S. But of course, what is happening in terms of the accusation on China and the overcapacity, that is the overcapacity of production, and the decentralization of the value chain, I think that will obviously bring capital transfer in terms, together with the factories. For example, in Malaysia, the whole emphasis on semiconductors, they actually see a major growth in that. And therefore, there would be a spread of capital throughout many of the emerging economies. But I also wanted to stress, whilst we're talking about Asia, obviously, this is almost like a new form of multilateralism, which is regionalization, is regional multilateralism. But it's not just in terms of Asia, because it's also the fact that Asia is also trading and opening up markets and relationships across the globe, so that you have with the Gulf cooperation, you have with Latin America, you have with Africa. So it's almost like a South-South, global South coming alive in that whole flow as well. So this regionalization is not a close regionalization, but it's an open, almost like multi-alliance building, multi-nodes. And I think we have to start thinking of it not so much as a multipolar world, but a multi-nodal world, because there are all kinds of nodes happening and all kinds of different interactions and capital flows happening. So that, I think, is something that is new for us to think about. But the other thing about capital is, what do we do with it? I think it's extremely important that we use it to invest in our new future. And that means basically, investing in sustainability, in inclusiveness, in the kind of education that will build up the new generation to be able to navigate the new world.
Nolene, on that last point, that's exactly the point I touched on, but I really want to stress, is as we see the globalization of production, and then what we're really concluding here is the FDI will follow that globalization. There is a real opportunity to do this in the right way. And that is actually, in my mind, the future of sustainability. And you've got to actually make sure that the production, as it happens, is done in the right way. It's both a downside risk and an upside opportunity. So how do we actually ensure that the people starting factories all around the place, the medium-sized enterprises, are actually thinking of doing things on a compliant basis? So I think that, to me, is framing the question. And that, frankly, is a question that Hong Kong is trying to play a role in and to answer.
Okay, so there's one last question at the back. Sorry, Michael, because we're running out of time. I need to let HSBC rep to ask a question.
Good morning. Thank you for the excellent insights this morning. My name is Alfonso Ballesteros. I help European tech firms expand in Asia. I'm also the chairman of the Europe Committee at the Hong Kong General Chamber of Commerce. And so my question is related precisely to that. In this multipolar or multinodal world that we are talking about, and considering the shifts that are likely to happen as a result of a second Trump presidency, what role do you see Europe playing, either economically, technologically, politically, in the relationships between the different blocs and in the flows of investment and the opportunities for retraining, for reinventing old industries? Where do you see Europe in there, and whether you see it leading or establishing new alliances within this new context? Thank you.
Great question. 1 minute each from Rakesh, and then Victor will end.
That's a difficult question because I don't see European footprints much, certainly in India, which is a bit strange because a long history, etc. One just doesn't see much of European technology, European transfers, etc. And I say it's very strange because, in particular, Germany has had this long tradition of Mittelstand, as medium engineering companies in particular. So one would have thought that they would do much more of that. And also, but on the training side, once again, Germany and other countries, Austria, Denmark, etc., the long tradition of vocational training, which that model is really something marvelous. I don't know if that's true in France also. But again, one doesn't see them being active. So from India today has a very active program for vocational training. Okay, but I don't see Germany being very active and saying, look, this is where you can do it. Of course, they themselves are having difficulty with the whole vocational training program because it sort of traps people into just what they've been trained, and so they're not flexible enough. But nonetheless, I think that Europe can do much, much more in terms of de-Americanizing many of these influences. But at present, I don't see European tech much around. I may be wrong. Yeah?
No worry. Nolene?
One of the challenge that we face in our world today is actually a normative struggle. One of ethno-nationalism, protectionism, and one that is basically more engaged in the multilateral world order, right? Although that world order, as we all have discussed today, is changing, and it has to change. It has to change in order to basically deal with the kind of realities and to make sure that it lives in people's lives and make a difference in the way we do our business. But Europe can actually be a counterforce to what is happening to America, because Europe as a whole understands the normative framework of multilateralism a lot more. And therefore, I think the way that develops is so critical in order to create what Victor hopes for. And this is actually the compliance and also the implementation of many of the norms and standards that will keep our world safe. And I think that that is a role that Europe, I hope, will be able to play as a counterforce.
Well, very quickly, I think Rakesh has answered the question. I mean, there's so many things that one could learn from Europe because of the Mittelstand, because of the training. Remember, I mentioned there's a massive need for retraining and that whole apprenticeship system. I think if China really develops along the lines of really focusing on the development of medium-sized enterprises, there's so much to learn from the German model, the Mittelstand model, except it's probably an order of magnitude bigger in size. But that is really where I think the focus can be. But the only thing I can add is, in my mind, Europe as a whole has a market as big as the US and China. I mean, but it's not one market, I have to say. To the extent that you can make it one market, and really allow, really just a little more, I hate to say the word homogeneity, I think this could be a powerful leveraging point for Europe and then European multinationals to then actually extend upstream, if you would, and then participate also in this globalization of the manufacturing process.
This is a wonderful panel. I'm not going to conclude because I'm going to give a closing remark towards the end, but I learned a lot as usual. Victor was worried that how are we going to spend 90 minutes on a stage? I think we can spend 9 days on the stage, given the excitement about, what we are doing and given how the world has been changing. I mean, I have learned a lot about, constructive solutions. It's wonderful that, we take all the challenges, all the geopolitics as a background, and we forget about them, without ignoring them, and then just try to see, how we can do better for ourselves and also for the world. Thank you very much.